You can't.
Okay, good morning, and thank you, Larry, and thank everybody else. Let me just minimize everybody. Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I would have been in person, except I had to shovel out about 3 inches of snow and an ice layer on top of it. So I got done, took a shower, and I'm all good right now. Anyway, so thank you for inviting me. We're going to talk about a game that's played when it's 95 degrees with 95% humidity and no snow on the ground, baseball. And that is my old buddy, Lawrence Peter Yogi Berra. I used to speak at his museum about 3 times a year, and Yogi would come up to me afterwards, pat me on the back when he was there, and he was there most of the time when I spoke. And he said, "Good job, kid. Good job. Let's go in the back. Let's eat and we talk." And he'd do all the talking, and I do all the listening. And I said, "Give me a yogiism." And he said, "I can't." And then he said, "If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying." Anyway, Yogi was all over the place in the 1950s during the glory days of baseball, at least the glory days of baseball in New York with the Dodgers, the Giants, and the Yankees, where a New York team was in the World Series from 1947 to 58. And you could even say, well, the Los Angeles Dodgers were there in 1959, and they had a lot of the old Brooklyn guys. And then the next 5 years, the Yankees again in the World Series. So Yogi was around, and Yogi was every bit a part of the culture of baseball. This guy, Jacques Barzun, in 1954, he was a French philosopher, noted that in 1954 in an essay, which he talked about baseball. And he said in this essay in 1954, whoever wants to know the heart and mind of America had better learn baseball. And Humphrey Bogart once said, a hot dog at the ballpark is better than a steak at the Ritz. And Humphrey Bogart used to go to minor league games in the Los Angeles area with the minor league Los Angeles Angels and the Hollywood Stars. Baseball is ingrained in the culture and has been ingrained in the American culture since the 1880s. It's not as ingrained in American culture today as it was, say, when we were kids through the 60s into the 70s. Other sports now are more prominent, like football. But baseball was the king once. And it's exemplified by the fact that some of us, at least I know I did, when I was going to PS 151 in Queens, had to read this poem, Casey at the Bat. Was Ernest Thayer, who was the anonymous author of Casey at the Bat, is he a baseball hero? Did he write a poem about somebody who really existed? Ernest Thayer and I have one thing in common. He was a columnist with the San Francisco Examiner between 1886 and 1888. And I wrote an op-ed piece for the San Francisco Examiner in 2001. He was a 19th century writer. I was a 21st century writer for the same entity, the San Francisco Examiner. So we have that in common. Casey was printed on June 3rd, 1888. No author's credit. Thayer read the poem at a Harvard class reunion in 1895. The poem, while it was important to some English teachers, was a throwaway. Thayer got $5 for it. I got $100 in 2001 for my piece. So if you take inflation and all that into account, we probably got paid the same amount of money, except his piece is a lot more famous than my piece. DeWolf Hopper was an actor. Some of you might have known his daughter, the gossip columnist Heather Hopper, who is also an actress. And if not for DeWolf Hopper, we probably would have never known of Casey at the Bat. He was a vaudeville actor, and Casey becomes a vaudeville act performed by DeWolf Hopper for the first time on August 14th, 1888 in New York, with members of the New York Giants and the Chicago White Stockings, today's Chicago Cubs, in attendance. It's estimated that Hopper performed the poem more than 10,000 times. This is the Springfield, New Jersey Library. And I speak at the Springfield, New Jersey Library. I was supposed to speak there this year, except they were flooded out last year, and I had to rebuild some of the library. And so we're working on another date sometime in the future. That is a Regina Sublima. Regina Sublima played cylinders, and this one actually works because Mrs. Spindell, who is the librarian there, Dale, played it for me. And it's in a room. There was a Herman in town, and he died, and he collected all this stuff, which is now in this room at the Springfield, New Jersey Public Library. It's the Springfield Hall of Fame, so to speak, of things that happened in town, and there's a little auditorium in there that I speak at. Anyway, if you were around in the mid 1890s, you could listen to somebody doing Casey at the Bat in your home if you owned a Regina Sublima. And that somebody was Russell Hunting. He was an actor. He was a voice actor, an entertainer, and a sound recordist. And he records it for the first time in 1893 and then again in 1898, both times using a heavy Irish brogue. 1905, Kaiser records it for Thomas Edison. Hopper's version was recorded for Victor. Remember his master's voice, Nipper the dog? Before it was RCA Victor, but that didn't come out until 1906. Oh, and you can listen to it on one of these things, an old Victrola. This is up in Chicoutimi, Quebec. I used to speak on cruise ships prior to COVID-19, the outbreak. And this guy opened his garage. I walked into his garage. I found all this stuff. And I said, I need to take a picture of me and that Victrola because it'd be perfect for the baseball talk because you could listen to Casey at the Bat in your house, crank it up, and let it go. You could hear it. Hopper would be the first to commit the verse to film in an early short made by Lee DeForest in 1922. Wallace Beery started in a 1927 film version. Jerry Colonna, and I know this group knows who Jerry Colonna is. I do know that, right? And if you don't, just put it in the little box there. But I bet you everybody knows in this group who Jerry Colonna was. He recorded a rendition for Disney, which later provided the basis for a 1946 Disney cartoon. Jackie Gleason performed it on his show in the 1950s. Johnny Bench and Tug McGraw and others, including George Steinbrenner and Billy Martin, together in front of a Tampa Philharmonic Orchestra, raising money for the local PBA, also voiced the poem often in orchestral settings. Oh, that's PS 151 in Queens. It's an old picture of it. It's still there. It's still there, the building. And I was there in fourth grade, 1965. Miss Alexander was my teacher, and she was an old woman. She was really old. She had the blue hair, and she had the white blouse and the blue skirt, and she had the napkin stuck here. She was the fastest person I ever saw take the napkin, blow her nose, and put it right back up there. She had been teaching, we heard, since 1920, over 100 years ago. Anyway, she gives me an assignment, me and the rest of the class an assignment. Analyze Casey at the Bat. Okay, analyze Casey at the Bat. I read the poem. The guy strikes out with the bases loaded. There's nothing rather interesting about him. He struck out with the bases loaded. He was a lousy baseball player. Oh, no, you got it wrong. You got it totally wrong. The guy strikes out. Yes, he strikes out. But isn't it about man's failures? It's you're set up to succeed, and yet you fail. Actually not. 1935, Thayer told the Syracuse Post-Standard, the poem has no basis in fact. It was a throwaway. He just wrote something for the $5. Sort of like baseball's beginnings in Cooperstown, which has no basis in fact, other than they found a drunk by the name of Abner Graves in Denver around 1900, 1901, and he was a kid back in Cooperstown, he claimed, and he saw Abner Doubleday set up the baseball field. But Doubleday wasn't in Cooperstown, New York in 1839. He was at the United States Military Academy, and there's no record of him ever being involved in baseball. Oh, take me out to the ball game. Does that sign mean anything to you? Does that sign mean anything to you? Ball game today at the Polo Grounds. Well, it meant something to a guy by the name of Jack Norwith back in 1907, 1908. He's on the subway and he's looking up and he starts reading the placards and the posters, like Dr. Zinmore's Zit therapy. That's what I used to concentrate on the subway, but he concentrated on this side. Ball game today at the Polo Grounds. And he was a lyricist. And he got to thinking and thinking and thinking about a song about baseball. Harry Caray sung it at Wrigley Field. I worked with Harry Caray in 1995 on an ill-fated radio show. Ill-fated not because of Harry, but because there was a baseball strike in 1994-95, and we tried to launch it in the middle of a baseball strike. What you don't see in that picture is Harry and his 6 best friends, all named Bud. 6-pack of Budweiser. Harry used to sample the sponsors' wear while he was on, and that went back to his days in St. Louis. Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Oh, yeah, Harry sung it in Comiskey Park before he sung it at Wrigley Field. Anyway, Take Me Out to the Ball Game was a song written in 1908. The songwriters, Norworth and Albert von Tilzer, never saw a baseball game. The song became famous on the vaudeville stage. Here are the words to the game. By the way, before I get into it, this probably was the first women's liberation song ever. Ever. Got to think of it when I read you the lines. First stanza. Katie Casey was baseball mad. Had the fever. Had it bad. Just to root for the hometown crew, every Sioux, that was slang for French currency in those days, every Sioux, Katie Blue. On Saturday, her young beau called to see if she'd like to go to see a show. But Miss Kate said no. I'll tell you what you can do. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jacks. I don't care if I never came back. Let me root for the home team. If they don't win, it's a shame. I'm like Ralph Kiner here. I forgot the words. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out in the old ball game. Kiner, actually, quick aside about Ralph Kiner. All those, if you remember him with the Mets, all those errors he made were on purpose. Phil Harris, the Jack Benny sidekick on the Benny Show, was his next door neighbor, and Ralph learned comedy from Phil Harris. Anyway. Trixie Fraganza was Katie Casey. The song was written as Jack Norworth's ode to his girlfriend, the progressive and outspoken Trixie Fraganza, a famous vaudevillian actress and a suffragette. And there she is. She is a suffragette back in 1900s, 19-teens. And she wanted women's rights. And speaking of women's rights, we'll get into that after this on the ball game. Katie Casey knew baseball. She was not happy with the umpires. She was standing in the front row. She was part of the new women movement of the early 20th century. She took the lead. She was engaged in living in the world uninhibited and full of passion. The suffragettes have something to do with some baseball traditions. Back in 1910, April 12th, 1910, as a matter of fact, William Howard Taft was the president of the United States. There was a convention in Washington pushing for women's voting, and Taft met with some of the women. And the women were basically, why won't you let us vote? Why can't we vote? Why can't we vote? We're people too. Why can't we vote? Why can't we vote? And Taft is getting increasingly upset with all of this that's going on. He tells one of his aides, get me out of here. Isn't there a baseball game? Yeah, I want to go see the baseball game. Well, the aide, I don't know if they phoned or whatever they did. They got a hold of the Washington Nationals baseball team. They quickly erected a presidential area. And Taft said to the women, we got to go. Got to lift the spirits of everybody here, including me. We're going to the baseball game. Goodbye, farewell, so long. And by the way, you're not going to get the right to vote. Norma Bays was the one who made Take Me Out to the Ball Game famous. By the way, Taft went to the baseball game throughout the first pitch. First time that ever happened. And additionally, he got up in the 7th inning. Seats were 19 inches at that time. And he was a big man, about 300 pounds by the 7th inning, even though the games were going about an hour and 15 minutes in those days. He's squirming. He gets up in between the top of the 7th and bottom of the 7th inning and stretches. Everybody in the stadium's looking around. Hey, the president's stretching. We better get up and do the same thing. And he sat down. They sat down. They got up because they thought he was leaving. No, he stayed for the end of the game. And with that, the seventh inning stretch and the first pitch, presidential pitch, were born. That's Nora Bayes. She was Norwood's wife in 1908, and she popularized the song along with Shine On Harvest Moon, which she co-wrote. It was played at the ballpark for the first known time in 1934 at a high school game in Los Angeles. It was played later that year during the fourth game of the 1934 World Series between Detroit and St. Louis in St. Louis. Song in the movies. Well, there you go. MGM's gay Technicolor musical starring Frank Sinatra and Esther Williams and Gene Kelly. Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Also with Betty Garrett, who ended up on All in the Family later on. It's in Night at the Opera with Groucho Marx and Harpo and Chico. The storyline is pretty simple. There's a great tenor in Italy, and Groucho is the manager of the opera company. Margaret Dumont is the chief benefactor of the opera company. He goes with them to Italy, and then he runs into Harpo and Chico, and they have this great singer, and Groucho loves this great singer, and he's going to bring it back. They're stowaways and all that other stuff. They get to the opera house, and they have the guy who Margaret Dumont wants, and they got the guy that Chico Harpo's friend. Well, they got to kill some time. They got to knock out the tenor to get the Alan Jones character up there, and in doing so, they got to kill some time. So what do Harpo and Chico do? They take the sheet music of Take Me Out to the Ball Game, hand it to everybody in the orchestra pit. They play Take Me Out to the Ball Game. Groucho comes down selling peanuts and Cracker Jack, and you got to watch the rest of the movie to find out what happened. Harpo Marx returned to the song on I Love Lucy in 1955. It's been included in numerous movies and TV shows. Take Me Out to the Ball Game was honored as the 2008 Songwriters Hall of Fame Towering Song. The tune ranks in the survey polls as one of the top 10 songs of the 20th century in America, second only to, or third only to, Happy Birthday and the Star-Spangled Banner as one of the most easily recognizable songs in America. Norwood saw his first game in 1928. 20 years later, Von Tilzer in 1940, 32 years later. Who's on first? That's who I'm asking. Who? Yeah, who's on first? Abbott and Costello. Maybe the most famous comic routine in the business. And it goes on and on. Now, people still do this routine, but they do it with music groups and all this other stuff. They're the ones who made it stick on radio and then TV and in the movies, although they may not have written it. It's one of America's classic comedy routines. Who's on First was a type of vaudeville act that was a common style. It descended from a turn-of-the-century burlesque, and QUE at the end means it's family show on burlesque. If there's a K at the end, it means the girls take off their clothes. Burlesque sketches that used plays on words and names. Bud Abbott said it was taken from an older routine called Who's the Boss? 1993 obituary of comedy sketch writer Michael J. Musto states that shortly after Abbott and Costello teamed up, they paid Musto $15 to write the script. Well, my buddy is Max Stocelli. He's a comedian, the king of the cruise ships. He broke in with Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David and Gilbert Gottfried and Paul Reiser, and can't think of the woman's name right now who was there. It'll come to me eventually. Anyway, they were part of that Carolyn's crowd and all. And Max said to me, I was talking to Max one day, I said, Max, did they pay Musto money? He said, what, are you kidding me? Yeah, you can't be kidding me. We're comedians. We steal from everybody. And well, he claims they never paid Musto. Abbott's wife recalled him performing the routine with another comedian before teaming up with Costello. After they formally teamed up in burlesque in 1936, he and Costello continued to hone the sketch. It was a big hit the fall of 1937 when they performed the routine in a vaudeville revue called Hollywood Bandwagon, and the woman was Carol Leifler. Just remembered, Carol Leifler was the woman, and that was the group that was together, and they all did well. They all did very, very well. Max made a lot of money on cruise ships and Seinfeld, and Larry David, of course, big Yankee fan, and we'll get to Larry David in a few minutes about that. So they're offered a spot on the Kate Smith radio show, March of 1938. And they're previewing their material to the producers. Producers aren't the brightest bulbs, I could tell you that from being in radio and TV. They think they know what's going on, but they don't. And this story is going to prove it. One of the producers of the Kate Smith Hour didn't like Who's On First after watching Abbott and Costello perform it at a theater. Well, they wanted that on the show. They knew they had dynamite. They knew they were going to slay with that material, even though a producer thought it was no good, but it's only a producer. Yeah. But the only way for them to get on the show was to lie about we have nothing. We're out of it. We don't have any more material. You got to take this or you don't take us. Well, they were a big ratings draw. So they said, oh, okay. All right, you want to do that baseball sketch? Do it. If you got to do it, you got to do it. We don't like it, but do it. Well, in reality, Abbott and Costello planned this bluff, and they saw this as their chance to introduce Who's On First to a wider audience. It was a hit. It was a hit, Costello. Abbott and Costello premiered the routine on the Kate Smith radio show on March 24th, 1938. They may have gotten some help from John Grant and Will Glickman writing the bits. Grant was blackballed by Costello. He was accused of being a communist eventually. When Lou had no material, he brought it back. Glickman was still writing material as late as the early 1960s for Car 54, Where Are You? Oh, the routine had legs, performed at the White House, performed in the movies, on radio, on TV, and they were enshrined in baseball's Hall of Fame in 1956. Who's On First continually plays in Cooperstown. It never is given a break. Oh, Vin Scully, the Los Angeles and Brooklyn Dodgers announcer. Vin Scully is looking at his monitor and he sees this guy wearing Gil Hodges' old uniform, which will be retired this year for your old Brooklyn Dodger fans out there. And he's looking and he says, now we know the answer to baseball's eternal question of who's on first. Ladies and gentlemen, who is on first? Chin Lung Hu made his major league debut with the Los Angeles Dodgers on September 1st, 2007, against the San Diego Padres. There was also a Watt. Remember, Watt played second base? Well, this Watt who played second base played for Washington before the routine got going in the 1920s. Oh, Pearl Harbor in baseball. I had to go to Franklin Roosevelt's Presidential Library. I needed to talk to Franklin Roosevelt about a number of things. I knew Marty Glickman. Worked with Marty, actually, because Marty had a broadcast school in the late 1980s that I helped him out with. But anyway, I want to know, well, why'd you say it's okay to go to Berlin for the Hitler games? And he said athletes, shouldn't be, they're not politicians. And Marty agreed with him. Marty said he wanted to win that gold medal in the 4x100 relay with Sam Stoller, who I also knew. He ran the Millrose games. He wanted to shove that medal right in the Fuhrer's face. Unfortunately, Marty and Sam never ran. He was the first guy on commercial TV in the United States on April 30th, 1939. Wanted to talk to him about that. And also Pearl Harbor. Why did you tell baseball, go ahead and play? Well, the commissioner, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, wanted baseball to play. But he was unsure whether or not baseball should go on in 1942. And it's the green light letter. Roosevelt never ordered baseball to stop or continue playing. He made a suggestion. I honestly feel that would be best for the country to keep baseball going. Baseball provides a recreation which does not last over 2.5 hours. Of course, he died in 1945, so he wouldn't know that games last 3.5 hours, although they got that clock in there now that's shaving off time, allegedly, at least the first couple of days of spring training, and which could be gotten at very little cost, $1,500 a game in Yankee Stadium. But you know what, Roosevelt, his class could afford that. And incidentally, I hope that night games can be extended because it gives an opportunity to the day shift to see a game occasionally. He thought it was good for America's morale during World War II to keep baseball going. The movies. They're going to put me in the movies. They put Babe Ruth in the movies 10 times. 1920 silent film Heading Home starred the Babe as, what else, a baseball star. He starred in Babe Comes Home, a 1927 silent movie. No print has survived. The way the prints were made in those days, they would eventually disintegrate unless you took great care of them, like Harold Lloyd did. The 1928 movie, Speedy, has him portraying himself in a cameo role. He's signing autographs for kids, but he's got to get to Yankee Stadium because the game starts at 3 o'clock. He gets a cab ride from Harold Lloyd playing the cab driver, and hilarity ensues. You got to watch the scene. It's actually a good scene. Ruth was in 10 movies. But he wasn't the first baseball player ever to be on the vaudeville stage. Rube Waddell was in the 19-teens. But the first baseball idol of Manhattan, the first real star, was Mike Donlin. He was a .333 career hitter, took multiple breaks from the game to perform on stage and in vaudeville, where he was going to get paid more money. He retired for good in 1914, went into the movies. Started with Right Off the Bat, which featured his New York Giants manager, John J. McGraw. He made at least 53 appearances on film. McGraw was in a couple movies as well. By the way, in those days, the movie capital of the world was in Fort Lee. And if you go to the Fort Lee Library, go right across the bridge, George Washington Bridge, just go, it's about a mile from the bridge, and go in the parking lot. And there are posters all over the parking lot talking about when Fort Lee was the film capital of the world. So Donlin was able to get there without any problems. Just take ferry across the river and you're there. Lou Gehrig was in a couple of movies, and he auditioned for Tarzan as well. In 1938, the 1938 Western Rawhide was released. The film opens with Gehrig announcing at Grand Central Terminal that he's retiring from baseball. He's bought a ranch in Montana where he could relax in solitude with his sister. Now, wait a minute. He can't deal with playing first base with the Yankees anymore. This guy was New York City born and bred, went to high school in New York City, ended up at Columbia University, played with the New York Yankees, lived in New Rochelle. There's Lou Gehrig Way down in New Rochelle. In fact, his house is up for sale right now. And he's going to be a cowboy? He's going to be a cowboy. The movie is not very good. However, there is one benefit to it. He was filming it probably at the outset of the ALS, and doctors were able to see his movements from when he made the movie to where he was at the Mayo Clinic in 1939, and was valuable in terms of medical research. Babe Ruth was also valuable for medical research, one of the first people ever to get chemotherapy. Prior to the Yankees came out, 1942, there is Gary Cooper playing Lou Gehrig. Baseball Bugs, the cartoon where Bugs is a heckler in the outfield, and he says he could beat the Gas House Gorillas with one arm tied behind his back. And the Gas House Gorillas take him up on the offer, and Bugs, of course, wins the game, 96-95. League of Their Own, based on the Women's League that was around in the 1940s and 1950s. Bull Durham with the meathead pitcher, played by Tim Robbins on the left, and the veteran old catcher, Kevin Costner, Crash Davis, whose job is to turn the meathead into a major league pitcher. And there's the love triangle with Susan Sarandon's character, Baseball Annie, in there. Jerry Lewis when the Los Angeles Dodgers were uprooted, or rather the Brooklyn Dodgers uprooted to Los Angeles, the Dodger players became movie and baseball stars, so to speak. And Jerry Lewis they're talking to Pee Wee Reese, and there's old Popeye in the background to Jerry Lewis's left, you're right, Don Zimmer, the Geisha Boy. The Natural, the book, the movie, Robert Redford's in The Natural. Field of Dreams, and there's Kevin Costner in yet another role, talking to shoeless Joe Jackson. Moneyball, Brad Pitt, the Michael Lewis book / movie, which does not make the New York Mets former manager Art Howe, who is one hell of a nice guy and a brainy guy as well. He was a computer engineer at Westinghouse who just tried out to play for the Pittsburgh Pirates. A really nice guy, but they make him look terrible in this movie and in the book. Bingo Long, Traveling All-Stars and Motor Kings. It's a pretty good cast in this one. Billy D. Williams, James Earl Jones, Richard Pryor. Bad News Bears with Walter Matthau, who I don't believe did anything poorly on the silver screen or on Broadway. And of course, he and Jack Lemmon were in the Fortune Cookie together about football. The Odd Couple, and there's a baseball scene in The Odd Couple where Felix, Jack Lemmon, calls Oscar, who's at the Shea Stadium press box, and I know exactly how they did this. The main press box, the payphone faced the wall, didn't face the field, and that made it perfect sense for the people in the movie. Hey, Madison, phone call for you. Oscar gets up there and he's not looking at the game because there's a pole on the right side and the cord is too short for you to turn around to look at the field. He hears the cheers and Hayward Hailbrun comes up to him and says, "You missed the greatest play of the year, maybe the greatest play in Mets history. Bill Mazeroski hits into a triple play." Roberto Clemente was supposed to do it and then thought about it and said, "No, I'm not going to ruin my dignity," although it was for a comedy, right? And Mazeroski stepped in. And anyway, and mayhem ensues because there's a fight between Felix and Oscar. Major League, that's Major League 2, Charlie Sheen and Bob Uecker in that. Angels in the Outfield, that's me in 2018. That is the Forbes Field outfield, or what remains of the Forbes Field outfield, University of Pittsburgh, going out towards center field, not far from when Bill Mazeroski hit that home run that beat the New York Yankees in Game 7 of the 1960 World Series. Hope and Crosby. Well, there's a reason I was there, because Bing Crosby was part owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates in 1947-46. Bill Veeck sold a small chunk of the Cleveland Indians, now Guardians, to Bob Hope in 1946. Hope should have just bought the team outright. He had more money than Bill Veeck. A native of Cleveland, Hope grew up as a fan of the Indians and jumped at the chance to own a small share of his hometown team. Bing Crosby invested in the Pittsburgh Pirates the same year. Hope invested in the Indians, and Angels in the Outfield was shot in Pittsburgh. I knew Nate Fine. I was very young when I knew him. I knew him back in the late 1970s. And this is a Pulitzer Prize winning picture. When I knew Nate, he had a little photography place in Piermont, New York. He had been a Pulitzer Prize winner. Unfortunately for Nate, his career came to an end because Hearst decided to close down, or actually merge, the Journal American, the Herald Tribune, and the New York World into the World Journal Tribune. And they didn't need as many photographers, and they got rid of Nat. I'm sorry, not Nate, Nat. And he ended up taking pictures for Orange and Rockland and operating this little photography studio that he had in Piermont. Talked about that Pulitzer Prize winning picture taken in 1948, Babe Ruth Day. They retired his number. And this is Nat. He came over to home plate. Of course, the story was number 3 bows out, the uniform being retired and on. As they played Auld Lang Syne, I was trying to make a picture showing number 3, but it's only on his back. If you look at this picture, you can see the photographers are looking at Babe Ruth, the Yankees dugout was on the third base side those days. So they're on the right field line taking pictures of the Babe. Nets behind him because he came up through the third base dugout. He hung around the clubhouse, watched Babe come up, gets to near the top of the steps, and he sees this. So I walked around behind with the band still playing Auld Lang Syne, and there was his figure, his thin legs compared to his bulky body, his number 3 showing. So I made the picture from his back. Pulitzer Prize winning picture. Only Pulitzer Prize winning sports picture. Homer Simpson, The Simpsons. Well, this is now 31 years ago. 1992 champion, Springfield Nuclear Power Plant. The nuclear power plant employees playing some former major leaguers, including in the background there, Wade Boggs, Roger Clemens, and a whole bunch of others. Homer scores a game-winning run to give them the championship. Some of the shows, Mr. Ed, Wilbur, Sandy Koufax, and Alan Young. I'm not sure who Sandy Koufax is signing that ball for, whether it's Mr. Ed or Wilbur or Alan Young. Leo Durocher was the third base coach of the Los Angeles Dodgers when he was on the Munsters in 1964. He had no authority to sign any players at all, but he signs Herman Munster to a tryout after seeing him. Average American families just hitting fly balls to his son in the public park. Leo comes through the bushes, sees it, says to Herman, "We're going to sign you," and they do to try out. He injures everybody. He's 7'6", weighs 540 pounds. He's not going to make it because he's hurting everybody, and they release him. Elroy Crazy Legs Hirsch, the Los Angeles Rams general manager, this is a couple months later, sees Herman punting to his son, and he's ready to sign him. And Leo, who never liked the daylight except for daytime baseball, comes out of the bushes early in the morning, says, "No, don't do it, Elroy, don't do it." But Leo is on the Munsters. Jim Lefevre, Al Ferraro. Lefevre, I asked him one day, I said, how come you, and they were both with the Dodgers, how come, here you are, you're a headhunter on the island. How come nobody ever said there are 7 castaways on the island? And Lefevre looked at me. He says, "I do collect 25 cents residuals. Why tell them and end my residuals?" Jim Lefevre was the Dodger infielder and ended up managing the Seattle Mariners. And Ferrara, to his right, once said, "I knew I made it as a major league player because I had one of these, a baseball card. That meant I was a major league player." Bum, 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 bum. Bum, 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 bum. Story you're about to see is true. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. Hey, there's John Roseboro, the Dodger catcher on Dragnet. The Dodgers owner, there's some old Brooklyn Dodger fans in here because I really don't want to cross them in any way or get them upset. So, forgive me for mentioning Walter O'Malley. Appeared with the Rifleman star and former Brooklyn Dodgers first baseman Chuck Connors in Brandon in 1965. The Dodgers outfielder Willie Davis acted in The Love Machine, Jerry Lewis's film Which Way to the Front, and The Flying Nun. Roseboro, besides Dragnet 1968, was in Burke's Law, Kraft Suspense Theater, Mr. Ed, and Experiment in Terror. How many of you remember the Bilko Show or the Phil Silvers Show, where you'll never get rich? There's Phil Silvers, and there's Steve Bilko. And Steve Bilko was a great minor league player out in Los Angeles during the 1950s. He was a tweener. He was too good for AAA baseball, but not good enough to stick around Major League Baseball. So too good enough for AAA, not good enough for the Major Leagues. But he was Nat Hiken's favorite player. And Nat Hiken named the Phil Silvers Show after Steve Bilko. He was a local celebrity in Los Angeles, and there is a picture of him and Betty White together when she was doing a show called Date with the Angels, which was a show about the Los Angeles Angels minor league team, where Angels players would be a guest of Betty White. Moose Stubing from the Bronx, born in 1932. He was the manager of the Angels, and I got chance to talk to him about this later on in his career, or well, during his managerial tenure with the Angels. Captain Stubing of the Love Boat. Moose Stubing and Captain Stubing, what do they have in common? Producer Aaron Spelling used the Baseball Encyclopedia to name some of his TV characters and named Captain Stubing of the Love Boat after Moose Stubing. Moose Stubing never got any residuals, but he knows that the guy who's the star gave him a cloud. His character was named after him. Oh, there's Jack Lemmon and John Forsythe. I told you the Jack Lemmon story. For John Forsythe, it comes full circle as a member of the celebrities that play the Dodger Stadium, because John Forsythe had that great voice, great voice, landed his first paying job in entertainment as the ballpark announcer at Ebbets Field for the Brooklyn Dodgers in the 1950s. He would star in one of Spelling's hits, Dynasty, in the 1980s, and of course, he was Charlie of Charlie's Angels. Mr. Baseball, Bob Uecker, who I've known for a long time. Self-depreciation humor sort of runs with catchers, with Garagiola, who translated Yogi, Joe Garagiola, and also Tim McCarver. McCarver started his broadcast career in Philadelphia, not with the Mets, and he was with one of my favorite people, Whitey Ashburn, Richie Ashburn, who was the 1962 MVP with the New York Mets, who got a little boat, for his efforts being the MVP. Takes the boat out, it sunk. Typical New York Mets, 1962. Ashburn told McCarver on Phillies broadcast, there's only room for only one comedian here. That's me. And he was. Anyway, Al Hirt was responsible for Bob Uecker's career post-baseball. In 1969, the trumpet player saw Uecker doing a stand-up and arranged an appearance for Uecker on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. He made about 100 guest appearances on the show, was Mr. Belvedere, did the Miller Lite commercials, and is in Baseball's Hall of Fame as a baseball personality, which he was. On Broadway, there she is. Whatever Lola wants, Lola gets. It is Damn Yankees. Joe Boyd sells his soul to the devil, Mr. Applegate, for one good long ball hitter for his team, the Washington Senators, who were first in war, first in peace, and last in the American League back in the 1950s. Mr. Applegate grants his wish, turning him into a 22-year-old sports superstar who must go back to his wife before 9 p.m. on the final day of the year if he doesn't want Mr. Applegate to get his soul. You watch the play. You Gotta Have Heart was the other big song that came out of Damn Yankees. And there he is, right over here to our left on our really big show, the Amazing Mets. And there he was. The Mets sung You Gotta Have Heart. Among the people who are still alive from that team, Art Shamsky with the double-breasted suit at the end, and he's next to one of my favorite people, Rocky, Ron Swoboda. Tug McGraw is in there. I love Tug McGraw, and those are the three of my favorite Mets. And there are some people who I'm not going to talk about because I didn't like them all that much. But Shamsky is good, and Swoboda was good. And McGraw was great. And Ed Charles was a really nice guy. I never got to know Tommy Agee. He died too young. Oh, you know who was on the Ed Sullivan Show for 36 times with his wife? Was that guy in the middle, Cousin Jerry. It's my cousin Jerry. Jerry Stiller to you, but to me, Cousin Jerry. My father's name was Arnold. His brother's name was Jerry. Jerry, of course, was Jerry, and his brother was Arnold. And I said to Jerry one day, what's the deal here? Were we so poor that we couldn't afford more than two names? The reason I segue with Cousin Jerry is Seinfeld and George Steinbrenner. And Jerry was part of the storyline suggested by George Steinbrenner, the Steinbrenner influence on Larry David and subsequently Jerry Seinfeld, who is a Mets fan. Missing George, board meeting moved. Different uniforms. Missing George actually happened. Not in the baseball sense, but down at American Ship, where that was George's company in Tampa, there was a guy there who, hung around shady characters. And George worried about him. Anyway, to make a long story even longer, George checks out on Friday, says goodbye to everybody in the office and goodbye to this guy. George used to get to his office about 4 in the morning. It's Monday morning, and this guy's car is there. And he said, oh no, something happened. He goes into the office. The guy's not there. George has an all points bulletin out on him. He's friends with the Tampa police. And the guy would stroll in later that day, and George was relieved. Well, the story becomes George Costanza is missing. Same thing. His car is there. George can't find him. They go to the house, the apartment where the Costanzas are living. And this is one of my favorite scenes from Seinfeld with Jerry. And George goes up there with the Yankees traveling secretary. They knock on the door, and Frank Costanza answers. And they say, George is missing. We think he's dead. And Jerry Stiller looks at him, and he says, You traded Jay Buhner for Ken Phelps, which was the whole joke in there. That was the story. Board meeting move. If you knew George, his food was, or your food was his food. They come in, he smells food, and they move the entire board meeting to a place around Yankee Stadium. That happened. They used polyester uniforms in Tampa, which shrunk. It's a true story. So those were 3 storylines suggested by George. George actually failed the audition. He was on with Julia Louis-Dreyfus. He was supposed to be on. They wanted to use him, but if you go up to YouTube, you can see the scene. It's terrible. It is terrible. He actually did a scene in the show, and it was terrible. We couldn't use him. We cut him out. He wasn't funny. I don't remember exactly what went wrong with it, but it was quite an awkward situation, according to Seinfeld. Keith Hernandez, Jerry, a Met fan. George Costanza is worried that his best buddy friendship with Jerry is being imperiled by Keith Hernandez. Hernandez said when his agent, Scott Boras, asked him if he wanted to be on Seinfeld, he said, well, what's that? Boras explained that they'd fly him out first class, have him in a nice hotel for a week, pay him $15,000. Oh, yeah, I know who that is. Keith played himself on the show. George hosted Saturday Night Live. He was bigger than baseball. In a dream, he manages the Yankees and plays every position on the field. I'm not sure it was a dream. I am not sure. He was the owner. He was the TV producer. He was the general manager. He was the manager. He gave players B12 shots. He thought he was taking one. All the players should bend over and take a B12 shot in their butt. They did. Chico Escuela, Garrett Morris. Baseball's been very, very good to me. Retired Hispanic ball player with limited command of the English language. On Saturday Night Live, he wrote a tell-all book, Bad Stuff About Mets, sampled Tom Seaver, once borrowed Chico's soap, no give it back. In spring training 1979, Chico's unsuccessful comeback attempt was documented on several update segments. And I got a great story about this. I love Phil Rizzuto, and I love Ralph Kiner. I knew both of them. And NBC is taping, Channel 9's there, Channel 11 is there, they're doing the game. And Scooter runs into Kiner, and he says, who's this guy, Chico? I never heard of him. He said, oh, Chico. Now remember, Ralph Kiner studied at the feet of Phil Harris. Chico, I can't talk about him. But, you know, when 62, when we started, man, Casey thought he was going to be better than Mantle and all this other stuff. And until that unfortunate accident, one unfortunate accident, it's so bad I can't tell you. And it's going on for about 20 minutes. Finally, Channel 11 opens, and Bill White and Rizzuto are opening the show. And he talks about, hey, did you ever hear Chico Escuela? Casey was supposed to be. And White looks at him, and they stop the tape. He said, who told you that stuff? He said, Kiner. And White starts laughing. And then Rizzuto leaves, starts yelling at Ralph Kiner, you liar, you told me a lie, and all that. Phil was totally gullible, and Kiner got him. Cigarettes, big part of baseball, presenting Babe Ruth in the blindfold cigarette test. Old Gold's mildness and smoothness marked it right off the bat as the best. He died of throat cancer. Cigarettes, always buy Chesterfield. Bucky Harris, manager of the Yankees. Bob Elliott, MVP, National League, Boston Braves, 45. Teddy Ballgame himself, Ted Williams. Stan Musial, it looked like somebody knocked one of his teeth out to put that cigarette in there. Joe D, guarantee he didn't pay for that cigarette. He had short arms and long pockets. And Ewell Blackwell, the whip, the Cincinnati pitcher. Always milder, better tasting, cooler smoking. Always buy Chesterfields. They satisfy. Yogi, the World Series in TV. Haven't spoken much about my old acquaintance Yogi, but he was around. Yoo-hoo! Yoo-hoo. How many of you had Yoo-hoo? It was chocolate water. Put some chocolate in water and that was it. That was it. But he got Mickey Mantle to co-sign that it was great, although that might have been something other than Yoo-hoo in that bottle. The Moose Skowron, one of my favorite players. Casey sent him to Arthur Murray's dance school. He was a shortstop. He figured he could hit in the major leagues. He had no position. So I sent him to Arthur Murray to learn footwork so he could play first base. And Moose told me, it was the best thing that ever happened to me. I met my wife there. Look at me. I'm a Moose. And I played first base in the major leagues. Thank you, Casey. Elston Howard. Yogi meets the Oliveri family. They're the ones who are producing Yoo-hoo. At a New Jersey country club in 1955, the beverage is having trouble getting on the food stands in supermarkets. Yogi, they give Yogi to taste it. And they ask him, what's your opinion? Yogi's on board. Garagiola once told me somewhere in New Jersey that Yogi is going to step on a piece of land and a gusher is going to come out and he's going to get rich from oil. He said Yogi always stepped in it. One time I was in the office, said Yogi, and the phone rang when no one else was around. I always answer a ringing phone, so I did. The woman who was calling asked if Yoo-hoo was hyphenated. I said, no, ma'am, it's not even carbonated. He sold you Kraft Italian dressing. He sold you batteries. He sold you beer. He sold you bicycles. And he drove the Aflac duck crazy in the last Yogi Berra campaign while he was taking a haircut. I do miss Yogi. Last time I saw him was in 2011. He was always very, very nice to me. I was always welcomed at his museum. I used to bring family there and guests and my friends. Never got upset at me, always would talk to the people I brought with him, always would sign autographs and tell them stories. And I never took anybody out to dinner. I took them to see Yogi, which was better than a dinner for any of my friends who were from out of town. Oh, Joe D. in Maryland. Guarantee you Joe didn't pay for that cigarette or that drink or whatever meal that he got at the Stork Club. January 14th, 1954, Joe D. in Maryland eloped in San Francisco. 9 months later, Maryland files for divorce, citing only mental cruelty. There are all kinds of stories that go around. They're all hearsay to me, so I'm not going to tell you what they are, but you can only imagine them. Oh, there's me in Maryland in 2017 in Stamford, Connecticut, when they have their annual Summer Arts festival on the streets. 26-foot Marilyn came through and they positioned her. There's the church behind there. So when you came out of the church, the first thing you saw was her rear end, and there's a church to our left. And the first thing you saw was the halter top when you came out. DiMaggio walks onto the set of 7-Year Itch. Dismayed at the sight of his wife on exhibit for more than 2,000 strangers, he yelled, "What the hell's going on here?" Shortly after this publicized event, Marilyn and Joe filed for divorce. But Joe wanted a few things from a wife. He wanted a stay-at-home wife who would cook him dinner, who made less money than he did and was not as famous as he was. Well, she failed on all 4 counts. Baseball and song, Mrs. Robinson, which started out as Mrs. Roosevelt. We didn't start the fire, Joltin' Joe. Did you see Jackie hit that ball? About Jackie Robinson. Mickey by Therese Brewer. Joltin' Joe, 1941. We didn't start the fire. That was Billy Joel and Mrs. Robinson. Paul Simon wrote that. And there is Simon and Garfunkel, Mrs. Robinson, Old Friends Bookends. I'm going to cut to the chase here on this story because it's a long story of even how Paul Simon got to this part of the song. It was a 37-second snippet in the movie The Graduate. People told Paul, it sounds like you could have a song there, just flush it out. He does. He brings it to Mike Nichols, who's the producer of The Graduate. And he said, and it's Mrs. Roosevelt, Eleanor Roosevelt. He said, no, it's Mrs. Robinson. Without me, you don't have that song. And so here's the song. He has Joe DiMaggio in here. And he tells Dick Cavett, I said that I didn't mean the lines literally, and I thought of him as an American hero, and that genuine heroes were in short supply. He accepted the explanation and thanked me. We shook hands and said goodnight. Now, the old Yankees told me that it was Joe going to dinner with Paul Simon. Paul obviously had to pay. And Joe walks in, sees Paul Simon, and said, what the hell you mean? Where have I gone? I just did a Bowery commercial. I just did a Mr. Coffee commercial. I'm here. I haven't gone anywhere. What do you mean? And Paul Simon said, well, you know, the last time I saw you play was in 1951. I was 10 years old and you disappeared. I never saw you again. And that was the end of that. And he said, but I'm here. I'm with you. We're eating dinner together. See, Paul Simon made the mistake. He went intellectual on George, which he should, rather on Joe, which he shouldn't have done. He could have done on his brother Dom. I knew both of them. Dom was a nice guy. Joe wasn't. Dom was, he was an intellectual. Joe wasn't. So Paul Simon ends up on the Dick Cavett show, and Dick Cavett knows the background why Joe DiMaggio and Mickey Mantle hated one another. DiMaggio in 1951 is looking to his left. He sees 20-year-old Mickey Mantle. He's got the blonde hair. He's built, he's built like granite. His name even suggests he comes out of the ground, strong, Mantle. And he's jealous because he's 37. He's got a bad ankle. He's on his way out. So he's right then and there, he's jealous of Mickey. There's a fly ball hit to right center field during the 1951 World Series. Mickey has all the speed. He's coming in. He's charging, and trips over outfield sprinkler and tears up his knee. He blames Joe for that because Joe was loafing on the ball. So that is where their hatred started. So Cavett asks Paul Simon, why not Mickey? Why Joe? And he said, well, it's like this. It's all about syllables, Dick. It's about how many beats there are. Simply, Joe DiMaggio sounded better than Mickey Mantle. Eleanor Roosevelt and Ted Williams were the two people that Paul Simon considered for that song. Terry Cashman, who shares the same periodontist as I do, baseball's balladeer. Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, talking baseball. And there's something missing there, speaking of teeth. Joe DiMaggio. He's in this picture, and he has been airbrushed out. Talking baseball, Willie, Mickey, and the Duke, 1981 song, written and performed by Terry Cashman. DiMaggio was in that picture, but was airbrushed out because Terry was only talking about people from the 1950s, and Joe only played 2 years in the 50s, 50 and 51. Joe confronted him about it, and he said, this is all about the 1950s. And Joe said, yeah, I wasn't at my best in the 50s. I forgive you. The Scooter, Phil Rizzuto, only guy in the Baseball Hall of Fame with a gold record. And there is Meatloaf, the gold record from Meatloaf there with my son down at Wingfoot years ago. Mr. Loafer Meatloaf, Paradise by the Dashboard Light. Phil Rizzuto provides a play-by-play broadcast for the Meatloaf song. The player's an aggressive base runner. He nearly gets called out a few times, but he eventually tries to score the suicide squeeze. It's all about sex. Scooter never knew it was about sex until his kids told him. And Huckleberry, he fooled me. Giving back the gold record? No. Phil Rizzuto. The Wagner card. Well, at one time, it was the most expensive baseball card going. This card's worth less than a cent. Baseball cards were not mass-produced until the 1880s. That's when tobacco brands such as Old Judge and Gypsy Queen inserted cards into their products, featuring illustrations of players, basically to keep the flimsy packages intact. The 1911 American Tobacco Company T06 Wagner sold for $6.6 million in auction, August 2021. Legend had it that Wagner was a teetotaler who abhorred the use of his likeness to sell tobacco. The production of the card was limited. This card's worth more money. 1952 Mickey Mantle sold $12.6 million August 28, 2022, according to Heritage Auctions. The card is the most valuable baseball card in the world. Cy Berger is the father of the modern baseball card, and you probably had some of those. The baseball card Could teach you how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide to get players' averages. That helped me. Oh, gambling, flipping cards. That was your intro into gambling, flipping cards. Also, they taught you the value of things. You traded one card for another card. Geography, if you want to know where a player was playing, you can look it up on the map. And bicycle flaps. They were great for bicycle flaps. Honored by the Hall of Fame, that character, Homer Simpson, 2017, was honored by the Hall of Fame. Also honored by the Hall of Fame, Casey at the Bat, John Fogerty's record center field of 1985, League of Their Own, the movie, and Who's on First. Football's number one by 1965. That's down in Wingfoot. My buddy Bruce Morton with the ABC microphone to the left. Weeb Ewbank, the coach of the New York Jets, behind Joe and Bruce. And there's me on the right talking about the Super Bowl, 1969 Jets win. And boxing. Ali. There's Muhammad Ali in boxing. Football overtakes baseball. Boxing, baseball are two of the sports that take a nosedive after the 1950s. And horse racing. Horse racing surviving because of casino betting. 1950, baseball, horse racing, and boxing dominated American sports. Television changed that dynamic. By 1965, football surpassed baseball in popularity. The decline. No real new songs, no new literature, which reminds me of the story of Yogi. Ernest Hemingway comes through the Yankee clubhouse, and he's meaning Ernest Hemingway, Whitey Ford, Ernest Hemingway, Mickey Mantle, Ernest Hemingway, Yogi Berra, Ernest Hemingway. Yogi sticks out his hand, looks at Ernest, says, "What paper you write for, Ernie?" Should have answered the Kansas City Star. That was true. No new movies, just another sport. Jim Bouton humanized players with his book Ball 4, one of the 20 most influential books of the 20th century, according to the New York Public Library, used as part of the arbitration when Peter Seitz ended the reserve clause. And soccer. Soccer gets better ratings on TV than baseball these days because of the changing demographics of the country on Saturday going head to head. Jacques Barzal in 2007 was upset with baseball. The commercialization is beyond anything that was ever thought of, the overhauling, and really the game itself. It's out of proportion to the place an entertainment ought to have. Other things similarly commercialized and out of proportion, but for baseball, which is so intimately connected with the nation's spirit and tradition, it's a disaster. Well, it ain't over until it's over. We're almost over, but it ain't over until it's over. And Mike Dyer, the late Mike Dyer, who passed away 2 years ago, is working for the Long Island Press. It's 1973. And Yogi's Mets are hanging in the National League East. They've had a lot of injuries. M. Donald Grant, the Mets owner, holds an owners meeting with the players, which Tug McGraw runs out. You got to believe, you got to believe, you got to believe. But the Mets hanging in there because none of the other teams in the National League East pulling away. But they're hanging in there by a thread. So they have really no room for error. They're at home. They lose a game. Mike Dyer says to Yogi, or asks a question to Yogi, is it over? Yogi's answer, it ain't over until it's over. And it ain't over until it's over. That's the last team picture I ever took with Yogi. There's Yogi down there in the first row next to the Yankee general manager, Brian Cashman, and that is me behind Yogi in the second row. It's over. My last picture with Yogi, June 26, 2011. Thank you so much for inviting me. Any questions, any comments? It's all yours.